welcome everyone to another Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. My name is Nina Joshi, and I am very excited about our guest today. We will be bringing on Lois Drapin, and we also love questions here at Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. So if you have any for Lois, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we can get those answered. Before I formally bring on Lois, would like to share a little bit more about her. Lois has a very interesting career working as an executive consultant and advisor to CEOs and their teams at companies both big and small in the healthcare/health tech space. She also has a lot of experience working with a variety of technologies, from drones to ambient devices and sensors and anything in between, for companies ranging from pharma to payers and insurers. And she both has the consumer view as well as the physician and professional view. So with that, would like to formally bring on our guest, Lois. Lois, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm glad to meet everybody. Thanks.
Of course. So maybe to start off the conversation, would love if you can share. I know you have such an illustrious career. Would love if you can outline for us maybe some of the things that you consider to be, the most interesting things that you've been involved with.
Okay, so just to sort of position the day, I've had a healthcare career and I've had a academic career as an academic dean. I think one of the more interesting things I've done in my life, it was I started and pioneered college programs in prisons in the United States. So I worked in some of those maximum security prisons, both on the federal side and in New York State, that people don't like to talk about. And we brought in colleges, community colleges, private colleges, public colleges. So one of the themes for me, I think, is partnerships and strategic relationships. So you'll be hearing that throughout the day, which is very important. Strategic relationships and partnerships are probably the most important thing for either emerging companies or legacy players. I mean, you need to have them work well. And just for Women's Day here, I started off in women's health at Wyeth, which had the largest pharmaceutical products in women's health at the time, just so that you know that. So I did some of the first patient longitudinal data plays that were ever done in pharmaceuticals, but that's not really what I want to talk about today. One of the most intriguing things I've ever done is helping United Healthcare, and that was a multiple year assignment. I launched their National Health Access initiative, and that was under Andy Slavitt. I had done some work for Andy Slavitt and his company, which was then sold to United, and he called me and said, "Can you write us a consumer strategy?" So I said, sure. We wrote a consumer strategy, and the reason was, prior to the ACA, United really wanted to test the direct-to-consumer market to see if people would purchase healthcare. We said, sure, we'll help, and we ended up launching this across 50 states, essential products. The most important thing about this, though, is that they were selling to people that had never purchased healthcare before. So these were. Yeah, never. Wow. And so this is really interesting. This is the national. It was a group of, it was the HR Policy Association. I don't know if it's still called that anymore, but it's a group of self-insured employers that were interested in looking at their truck drivers, their delivery people, their janitors, lower level executives. People who either are underinsured or people who had never purchased insurance before. Right. So that, we started off the usual, looking at the analysis. We looked at all the meta-analysis of all the consumer surveys and everything that was out there. And we thought we were all set. And then we did the consumer, insight groups and focus groups. And we were miking up a 50-year-old woman from one of the self-insured people, and we had a great person to moderate. She said, how are you feeling? And the woman just burst out and she said, how are you feeling? Because we're going to ask you questions today about what it's like not to have an insurance card when you go to your doctor, questions like that. Yeah. And the woman broke out. And meanwhile, we had looked at everything, and the woman broke out in tears. And I looked at everybody in the room and said, boy, did we miss this.
Yeah.
What did we miss? We missed emotion. So decision, and this has, I will say this is one of the most meaningful moments I've had in my long career, and that is emotion in the purchasing decision, emotions. So every time you put a multiple choice question in a survey to somebody, it doesn't pick up the emotion, right? And then we did something that I wanted to do for a long time. We put sensors on people on vests, and we put them in the room with their significant other. So when you make a decision about buying health insurance, you purchase your health insurance, you talk to your spouse, your best friend, another employee, but all of these surveys that are out there, they only ask your view, which can be easily taken over by someone that is more important to you. We put sensors on both people, and we asked them to bring in the person that would be making the decision. Husbands brought in their spouses sometimes brought in their best friends, things like that, or grandparents or mothers. And we wired them up. We also we then put it together with facial expression analysis from the Carnegie Robotic Institute. And we then put it into a film-based product that was for looking at animals during clinical trials, because at the time there was nothing we could do. And we measured that emotion over time. What we found was whatever your center is in emotion, how distant you were from that center mattered in your decision making. So here we saw a husband with flat affect who is steaming underneath, angry at his wife for picking the most expensive thing because she thought the most expensive product would be the best product, right? So I learned this has, and this came late in my career. I mean, this was such a meaningful moment to me that I can see that it took it to, here was enabling technologies. How did we pull that through? Andy Slavitt said to me, I'm sick and tired of taking pie charts and graphs into benefits advisors. What can we do? We made a film. It wasn't a great film. You could see my glasses, just like you can see now, the reflections in the glasses and stuff from the marketing focus group things. And we took it in and we showed them their own people talking about how they make a purchasing decision. And what happened was when we turned the lights on, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Because for the first time, benefits officers realized, oh my God, I'm just like the person that I serve. Right. And we then took this product, we personalized it, and we launched it in 50 markets across the country. So it was a long couple of years, but it was probably the best learning experience I've had. And talking about innovation, which we'll talk about later, I hope, it was something very new. I think another thing that where I used enabling technologies was Cognito, Kognito, where they avatars or virtual humans, as we call them. Today, we call them assistants, but I think this fell in pre-artificial intelligence because we were talking about how people have conversations and how to have empathy or to show empathy and compassion on difficult healthcare conversations. So it could be a student to another student who thinks that they're having mental health issues or drug addiction. It could be a veteran who is having PTSD talking to other veterans or talking to a therapist. And so we use this to sort of take this through. And this was an amazing experience. I did, I was a full-time executive. This was over 3 years. So that was really, and I would say the third experience is, one closer to my heart today, which is social isolation and loneliness. I'm working with a company in New York called Klatch, K-L-A-A-T-C-H. They're actually measuring using NLP. Oh, interesting. In older adults in homes. So, and they're just reaching, I just got a note from the CEO last night. He's at an aging conference and he said, I think we're hitting the tipping point. People are beginning to understand what we're talking about. So it's taken us a while to get there, a couple of pivots, but I think, so I think these, and you'll notice the theme through them is all something about the biopsychosocial framework, right? Which takes you into social determinants of health. So I saw that way early, even with my inmate students, if you're feeling good and if you're, and if you have all the things that you need in life, you're going to be a healthier person. And so, if you take that simple statement right through, how can technology abide by that. So, those are the things those are the three that stand out. There are many more, but because I've worked with so many companies. I've worked with WebMD, I've worked with Adidas, I've worked with, many different companies. So, but those are the three that really stand out with me because they have a theme that's recurring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like we could just dive into each example on its own, but I definitely agree. I think, we've definitely heard this before, even on this series about, healthcare just being so much more, or health being so much more than healthcare. And I think all of your examples really illustrate like the importance of really thinking about someone holistically, like as a person,
right.
not just a specific
Right.
piece of their health.
Right.
And what else thought was really interesting was, what you were talking about with the United example about, being able to present information in new ways to kind of get people to see the empathy. That's so interesting because as someone who, uses presentations and pie charts in my own career, using different modalities like video to really like resonate with someone, I think is ingenious.
Yeah, no, I'll never forget that conversation with Andy Slavitt. I mean, he called me up and he said, I'm sick and tired. It's what he said. I'm sick of presenting. You probably know Andy from his podcast now. So he's a pretty direct guy. He goes, I'm sick of these pie charts and these graphs. I want these people, if it's emotion we're talking about, we need to let them feel it. Yeah. And I said, no problem. We got it. So, and so on the film itself, you could actually see our emotion meter moving as it was taking in all of the data from the, it wasn't real time, but it was, we did the data from real time. And you could see the anger, you could see the anxiety. I called one of my older companies was Vivometrics, which is the granddaddy of all sensor companies. They were. And I called him up and I said, what patents do you own? He said, well, we have 13 patents. I told him what I wanted to do. And he said, we own the patent on anxiety. I said, I want that patent.
That is
and that's what we did. So we measured that and it really, really impacted. And you saw how people made decisions, which is kind of frightening, actually.
Yeah. It's definitely not what you think it's going to be.
And the other thing that it did is it removed the bias from, it somewhat removed the bias from, large focus groups or focus groups.
Right.
Because a moderator can lead a person, whether they know it or not, to the trough of answers that they want. Yeah. So this gave us another way of looking at how we could actually see what decision the person was making and why. And if they were comfortable with it. I think that's an important point.
Yeah, no, the bias piece is, I didn't even think about that, but that is a very good point. That definitely can happen. So it's even another way to show that this is all validated and, genuine feelings.
Right. So it's really interesting in that way. I mean, you're an innovation at Kaiser. What kinds of pre-analytical stuff are you doing to get the patient at the table?
Yeah, it's definitely very similar when it comes to focus groups and being able to talk to patients. I think the biggest thing for us is, especially now that we are virtual, right? Like you can't just have someone come into your office, your space to talk to you. But I think what we found is being able to see people the way that we're, seeing it right now in their own homes, I think really, to your point, adds this layer, this contextual layer to really understand, like, you see my background, you get more of a sense of who I am versus me just showing up in an office in a conference room with,
right.
So I think that has been really interesting for us kind of virtually. It was like a byproduct that we weren't expecting, but it ended up being really interesting to kind of just, peek into their lives a little bit more too.
Right. So it's a little bit of ethnography there.
Yeah.
Right? It's like for the camera that follows the people in the suburban vans around to find out that they needed, they needed larger cup holders. Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think healthcare is, learning. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're learning. So. Absolutely. So it wasn't just about insights. We actually, the product that we put in front of those people was the first Massachusetts ACA products, actually.
Really?
So they were looking at real things, even though they even though they weren't from Massachusetts necessarily, but they were looking at real things. So it, really gave us some insight into what they liked or what they perceived they liked in these things. So absolutely. Yeah. So almost everything I've done has been with some new technology, the drones, the virtual humans, which I just loved. I mean, I love that virtual human, the avatars. I think it's just a fantastic way to get to people, and you know, and other types of technologies over time. Even they're just simple enabling technology. I mean, look at WebMD. You know, I was one of the first 9 employees at WebMD. So I mean, we were really trying new things then. You know, and talk about startups. I mean, that was a well-funded startup. We're talking about $700,000 or $800,000 in the bank. You don't see startups like that today. And so we could afford to buy companies and make mistakes, and we did. You know, so.
Making mistakes, I mean, that's part of it, right? That's part of the innovation process, is being able to.
Well, they say it is, but I don't know how much it's really accepted internally.
That is true. Yeah.
You know, if you're someone that's made a big mistake inside a company, I'm not sure you're going to be there next year. Even
that's the big asterisk that they don't talk about.
Right. The asterisk. All that you wanted to know about innovation and we're afraid to ask.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I love it. Well, kind of speaking about, you know, you've just shared so much and have given so many great examples of the work that you're doing. Would love, you know, if you can kind of think back or what are some of the things that you would say your roles have in common? What's kind of like that underpinning theme that you would say has kind of brought a lot of these types of things together?
So I think, you know, first is the type of innovation, right? So, you know, if you use Clayton Christensen's like 3 types of innovation, so there's sustaining innovation, which is, you know, an improvement in an existing product, right? There's low end disruption when you go into so like when you go in at the bottom of something and then you become disruptive. So an example of that would be like Airbnb. When those guys started Airbnb, they rented out mattresses in their own apartment to, you know, when a conference was going on in their city, and, you know, look where they are now. So, and then there's new market disruption. A lot of what I've done, which is create a new segment in an existing market. So if you look at United, it was a new market disruption, right? Because they still had to do everything that they were going to do before, which is all the commissioners of insurance, you know, still had to, you know, approve across 50 states. That was a process. They still had to meet their legacy provider of benefits, which was Hewitt at the time, which was a very old system and, you know, hard to manipulate for people. You won't remember what it was like to pick out your benefits, but it was not a nice event. It wasn't person-centered design, as you would say. And so I think those 3 things, and then the other thing really would be that they all involve some sort of technology, right? Whatever it was, and enabling technology. I think what I've learned over time is that companies that come out with technology for technology's sake, I don't think are going to make it in healthcare. And, you know, the word care in health is like a really important part of healthcare. And so I think there needs to be solutions that are wrapped around enabling technologies. It's not just about the technology. So when I go to conferences and I see people just talking about telehealth, I want to know what problems they're solving, right? And does that make sense? You know, and I think the last thing is about managing matrix relationships, because no matter what I've done, the United thing was 50 states. It was, you know, 12 the largest self-insured employers. It was it was the other managed care companies that had to cover other states that United wasn't in. It was because, you know, they had to be all of that. It was, you know, it was all of that. So, and at WebMD, I managed the entire New York system, 5 H, you know, it was Empire, it was HIP, it was, you know, Blue Cross Blue Shield, it was, you know, 5 different, and you had them around the same table at the same time. So it was pretty, everybody said my doctors, they were all the same doctors. You know, so I mean, it's really interesting to see how proprietary people get when they're around the same table. So I would say those are the things, and I also want to throw in there a dash of politics and culture. And I think every company, whether it's small or whether it's large, has its own politics and culture to contend with. especially for those who are championing innovation of any sort. And so I've had a lot of things happen to me at one of the pharma companies. I've been on 3 innovation teams, 2 pharma. One of the pharma teams, actually, somebody was so upset that I was doing something innovative, they actually canceled the largest meeting that we were having, not by mistake. And we all had to fly out to Seattle. And the president was very upset when he had to triple pay for things because he had promised that we would be out there. So there are politics that you wouldn't believe that go on inside. So sure, you've seen it. You can't talk about it, but I can now that I'm away. So and I think that's something that people need to keep their eyes on because I was very lucky at Wyeth. I had a boss who basically was the machete for me before I did anything. He was out there, but he told me 6 months into it that he was getting calls the first 1 or 2 months. Who is she? Why is she here? I don't understand what she's doing. And then at the end of 6 months, it turns out I got the largest stock grant that was ever given to anybody in the whole company in our managed markets division. So it took me 6 months to prove myself, but I did. So it's a tough road. Innovation is an uphill battle, no matter what you call it: innovation, disruption, transformation, whatever you call it.
Many words for it. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. I just glanced at the time and I realized that we are 6 minutes out, but we have a lot of questions for you, Lois.
Okay.
So I already know we're going to need a part 2 of this conversation. So
that'd be fun.
We already know that's going to happen.
I don't get a chance to talk about myself, so this is kind of fun.
And we love hearing about it. But maybe what we could do is, at least for like the last 5 minutes, is just kind of get some of these questions answered for you. So I'm using the Q&A feature, and the first question is, would love if you could share a little bit more about your view on remote monitoring, but kind of remote monitoring married with more integrative, holistic healthcare, if you're seeing anything in that space.
Are we talking holistic healthcare, like nutrition? Are we talking nutrition? Are we talking about muscular skeleton kinds of things, right? Mental health? Yes.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing a lot of that. I think that telehealth, we're seeing a lot of, and remote monitoring, including the sensors. We're seeing a lot of that in aging, for example, the sensors in aging. For people falling, it's a big problem. Personal emergency systems are not working. They never have. People pay for them, and that's a low end disruption that you can come in and make, right? If you can keep your prices low. So the answer is yes. I'm seeing that, and it should be integrated. But I think you also have to have in-person stuff or coaching with that as well.
Yeah. So it has to kind of be a little bit of both.
Yep.
Gotcha. And how have you driven private sectors to collaborate with one another despite their competitive nature?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've had to do this many times. Forget the private sector, say same category of same category, right? I think you have to start the meetings out with, it's kind of something I learned in prison because, believe it or not, we had the wardens and one people at the security team at the table, and we had professors who kept saying, "I'm a tenured professor. You can't touch me. I'm protected." And we had the security people saying, "That's not true. I can kick you out." Right. So when I first took my job at the at the State University of New York, at the University of Wisconsin, teachers were on strike against the prison. There was no program happening. So it took me a 108-page grievance report to get to the bottom of it. But I think what you have to do is you have to be very direct and honest with people. You're not here. I know you're representing yourself, but we're here to serve the people, whoever the people are. It could be the patient, it could be the school student, it could be whatever, and you sort of move it through that. Managing those relationships is not easy, but you get to know people in a different way.
Absolutely. Wow. That's a really good point of just, finding the common, we're all here to kind of serve, and we have a shared interest.
Right. Yeah. We're not here to talk about you. We're here to talk about them.
Yeah.
Right? And them is us, by the way. So, let's do it the right way first time around.
Exactly. So, I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then we have another question. Are there any new modalities that you're seeing as it relates to telehealth therapy for mental health and well-being? I know, just telehealth in general, virtual Zoom type of therapy is something that is happening, but are you seeing anything else, maybe using sensors or AI or avatars?
Well, I think the AI coaching is going to come into effect. I mean, I'm starting to see that for contact centers, for example. So, and right now in contact centers, AI is used toward, once you're on the phone with somebody, it corrects you. But I'm starting to see coaching where people can, it's almost like a flight simulation where people can be simulated before they get on the floor. And I think that's what's going to happen with training on the training side for telehealth, because the more conversations that people have, and this is what I learned at Cognito, the more we learn about how those conversations are happening. So that can be fed into artificial intelligence. So yes, I think you're going to see AI in a different fashion than it might be used today. Sensors, possibly, I don't know. It's a little bit, invasive. People may not want to have that right away, especially with mental health. So I think we need, but I think breathing, things like for breathing sensors, if you're having an anxiety attack or a panic attack.
Oh, that's true.
That's where a sensor could come in and be very helpful to the coach or to the psychologist or whoever, social worker is on the other side of the phone. So, yes. And I think we're seeing different ways of doing that. So there are bandages now that can't be seen. You don't have to wear a watch, right? There are lots of things that are happening.
Yeah.
And there are radar-based sensors that are coming into market now that you can just put in a room, and some of those are professing that they can see through many rooms. So I think we're going to see some different kinds of things. Whether that's going to take everything else and push it aside, I think it takes a very long time in healthcare to get to that point. And so ask me that question in 10 years.
Yeah. Whenever things may definitely change. So we are at time, which is crazy to me because I know that there's just so much more we could talk about, Lois. But we just don't worry, everyone on who's listening in, we're definitely going to be scheduling a part 2 of our conversation with her. So please tune into that. And there were 2 questions that we did not get answered. So we will send Lois these questions so that she can respond, and we'll post that response on social media. And if you also just want to connect with her on LinkedIn and ask her yourselves, definitely feel free to do that as well.
Absolutely. Well, I thank everybody for attending, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lois. And be sure to check out next week's episode with BCG Digital Ventures. We'll be having a great conversation there. And wanted to also just remind everyone about our digital health symposium at the end of this month, and all the registration information will be in the chat. Wanted to give one last huge shout out to Lois for such an incredible conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time and enlightening us today.
It's been a pleasure, and I wish you all the best of luck in all your innovation endeavors.
Thank you so much. Also want to thank our sponsors.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lois. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And thank you all for attending another Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. See you next week. Bye, everyone.